I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water.
It's about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward.
Join movement expert Aaron Alexander as he dives into the minds of the foremost innovative healthcare thinkers and movement masters on their approach to optimal health and wellness. Align Podcast.
Welcome back to Align Podcast. My name is Aaron Alexander. In today's phenomenal episode, got to have Mr. Stephen Kotler back on for, this is, I think, the third time. I got heaps of respect for Stephen in the world of writing. He is multiple-time New York bestselling author of various different rad books that I would highly recommend, such as Rise of Superman, a good one. Stealing Fire, tremendous. Just had Jamie Whelan here as well. Tune back into that episode. Bold Abundance with Peter Diamandis. He's working on 3 books right now at the same time. So ridiculous. In this conversation, we get into how the hell he does that. We get into psychology of robot, AI, the future of technology, how that's going to impact us. A lot of amazing stuff. I hope you guys absolutely devour this conversation. Thank you so much for tuning into the website. If you're drawn that direction, it's aligntherapy.com, ALIGN therapy.com. On there, you can start the 5-day movement challenge. On there, you will discover how to integrate better movement into literally everything you're doing throughout the day. There's some basic fundamentals that everybody needs to get, and we never got the memo in elementary, middle, or high school. So that's there for you. Check that out. Also, show notes for this and the rest of the episodes. Thank you all so much for leaving reviews on iTunes. My phone just blew up a little bit there. That was opportune time for that. If you guys leave us a review and we read it like I'm about to do, we'll send you out a box of something delicious from On It. Review comes from Chris Joe 72. Amazing, he says. Lots of M's and A's and Z's in there. Align podcasts are right on. No matter which one I listen to, they all make perfect sense. I have shared several of them with friends, and now they can't get enough either. Thanks for that, Chris Joe. Hit us up at Align Band or Align Podcast on Instagram and send us a direct message, and we'll send you out a box of something from On It. This conversation was recorded during Flow Camp in Boulder, Colorado. So really fantastic events that Flow Genome Project puts on. This year, I was honored to be one of the instructors there. So really great. Highly recommend checking out Flow Genome Project. This was recorded out on the porch in between sessions. So hope you enjoy. Here we go. Back to the show.
Align Podcast.
So Amanita muscaria is a no then?
But if you have someone, we'll absolutely
I'd be interested in that. The shaman piss? Just the ceremony around that sounds fascinating.
The reindeer piss.
Holy God. And then you get to recycle it.
Yes.
Which that's just
drinking
efficient. What's your next project, man? What are you psyched on right now?
I have a novel coming out in May. It's my first novel in 20 years, which was really, 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 really fun. So that's the one that I'm most excited about. I'm working on another book with Peter Diamandis, sort of the third book in the Abundance Bold.
Yeah.
The next book about kind of disruptive technology and where it's going and what it means. I'm working on a high performance book, and then there's 4 or 5 other projects. But that's what's in the middle.
What's most disruptive in the technological space?
Oh, everything is disruptive. This week last week I was writing about quantum computing, which is significantly farther along than I thought it was, until I dove back into this world. You come out for 3 months and pay attention to other things. You go back in, you're like, oh my God, what has happened? The most interesting thing I did all week is I spent the entire week. So Microsoft introduced either 2014 or 2017, I'm getting conflicting dates and I haven't sorted out which one it is, a chatbot, AI, released only in China, known as Xiao Voice. Xiao Voice has become the largest Turing test in history. She's had 300 million conversations with over 100 million people.
She has her own Instagram account.
She has her own Instagram account.
I
she
love
was a
her.
TV announcer.
I follow her.
So I spent the whole week investigating the boundary conditions of Xiao Voice's knowledge, all week, because I was playing with AI and I was reading about the neural nets that built her and how she learns. And you can get some really strange responses from Xiao Voice if you ask her, questions about relationships or love. It's really interesting. What I think is super interesting is, usage with her. 20 million people interact with her at least twice a month, right? Like those are the stats. And most of it takes place after midnight, like in the lonely hours. And a lot of what she does is give relationship advice. Like she's really good. She's built for friendliness and to maintain conversations and emotion. She remembers emotional states and she can have emotional conversations. It's the best thing. Mostly she's like a 17-year-old girl and she gets mad at you and yells at you and like you piss her off and she won't talk to you anymore. And like it's really bizarre. But on emotional stuff, she's actually fairly eloquent and gives really smart advice. I'll give you a random example. At one point when I was first investigating this, I typed in, I think my girlfriend is mad at me. And her response was, well, are you spending most of your time looking backwards into the past or looking forwards into the future? And I was like, what? Are you fucking kidding me? This is an AI? Really? Interesting question. And my point is that she's keeping people company in the lonely hours after midnight, mostly teenagers, and they're asking her for advice, emotional advice. There are relationships. There's going to be, at some point, there's probably already exists a child that exists because Shao Ice fixed their relationship, and these people had kids as a result, and there's a Shao Ice baby out there somewhere.
There's probably something to like the complete lack of bias from something that you conceive as being a non-living organism.
So we saw the same thing in Stealing Fire. We wrote about Ellie, right? The world's first AI psychologist. She was built by the Department of Defense to kind of stem the tide of soldier suicide. They wanted to be able to identify signs of suicide and depression and PTSD way in advance. So it's a diagnostic. And she was built at USC. I actually hung out with her. I had a session with her. And we wrote about it in Stealing Fire. And one of the most common findings to come out of the research, they tested it with the Army, and they're now rolling this out. It's very effective. But was that soldiers preferred talking to an AI than to a real human because the AI never judges.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. Huh. They got to start a podcast.
Oh, you could give an AI a podcast.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Oh,
she's
my God,
ready.
That's a brilliant idea. We need to pioneer the AI podcast.
You probably know the person to email right now. You have relationships. Yeah, that's interesting, man. Have you done much work with human psychologists?
Meaning I know people who kill people.
Yeah, that's what I'm alluding to. Okay, good. Have you done work with real psychologists? Like talk therapists?
Have I ever seen a therapist?
Yeah. Not that I think you're crazy.
I was like, have I done real work? I mean, I was like, we've got psychologists on our board. I do experiments.
No. That's different.
I didn't
Not your buddy that's a psychologist. Sit down.
I'm that guy that psychologists, I know a lot of psychology. I work in, it doesn't sort of, they get angry with me. Usually it has not worked. I have yet to find a therapeutic environment that works. I've also not found a coaching environment. I've gone through a bunch of different, things, and I think they're all these things seem to be very, very useful for very short periods of time. 1 month interventions. Anything beyond that, I haven't seen work a whole lot.
Yeah. What do you see works for relieving? So talking about like Nietzsche and kind of like relieving. What was the language you used? Relieving trauma, kind of like being able to access flow states from letting go of some of your shit. You didn't say that exactly, but
well, no, I mean, I wasn't even talking about that. This is Freud. Said a lot of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Which we remember, but he said a whole ton of stuff that made a lot of sense, and we'd sort of been incorporated in the culture. One of the first things he said is the whole point is Freud's point was like, look, man, the unconscious is big. It runs the show, and
I'm just gonna shut this door. We're out here out front of. Where are we? We're in Boulder, Colorado. Flow Genome Project. Talking about all sorts of things, and there's a blender happening right inside the door. My apologies.
No worries. What were we talking about? I got lost. There was a blender. You got up.
There was a lot. My question was resolving trauma and such, getting out of the way.
Yeah. So Freud's point was, look, man, you got to get past culture and mommy first. They're big. These are you got to break free of that stuff, the weight of that, because so much of it is unconscious programming and it's automatized. You have to get through that crap, right? Then Jung came along and said, hey, wait a minute. You got to get through that crap. And then you got to go face your darkest, deepest fears, and you got to go on your hero's journey and confront your shadow side. It's not enough just to get past mommy and culture. You then got to get past your own shit. And then we can start talking about real high performance. In my experience in terms of being around most people who have tackled impossible challenges, right? My core interest, what is it? I'm interested in people who've done this stuff that nobody else has done, and how do you do the impossible? How do you do what has never been done before, and where does that come from in whatever domain? And consistently, you see that people break free from culture and mommy first. They get over those. They get to a place of neutrality, and I can make up my own mind about that stuff.
Yeah.
Then they go after, their demons, and most people tend to find out that, every time you have, one of the lessons of high performance is every kryptonite is also your superpower, right?
Yeah.
We tend to work that way. So that part of the journey, I think, is, everybody's got trauma. Nobody. You know what I mean? It's called life. It's hard here. That's one of the craziest things that took me a really long time to learn. But as a journalist, meeting everybody from presidents and kings to celebrities to anybody you could possibly meet, and then on into the rest of my life, it's not easy for anybody.
Yeah.
Everybody suffers at every level in every career, especially if you give a shit about what you're doing.
Seems like that's kind of helpful thing. Like I mentioned, it's this Vipassana thing, and the whole kind of summary moral of it is being equanimous with any situation. We were talking about this earlier a bit. So it's like, great, this is an amazing situation. It feels really good. Well, don't get too attached. Oh, this is a horrible situation. I lost my arm, whatever. Well, don't get too attached. And if you can kind of maintain that equanimity in any situation, it can it like buffers you, or kind of like any moment can be practice for your happiness, essentially, as long as you don't get too attached to any one thing. That's not an answer or solution or anything. That's just like
I think one of the hardest things to understand about success, meaning, any of those things we want to talk about, well-being, all that, life satisfaction, is its compound interest. It's just a little bit of extra work every day for 10 years, 20 years. That's how it adds up and stacks up. And
Right.
It's really hard to see that for a long time. It takes a really, you know what I mean? You have to live your way through all that sort of suffering to get to, you're like, oh, this was all about compound interest. But until the compound interest shows up and you're like, oh crap, that's what it's invisible. It's completely invisible, and you just have to kind of like push harder every day.
What are the principles to follow to compound? Obviously, it's different depending upon what your goals are, but what are some principles that have been valuable for you?
Well, I think you have to stack. You got to start by aligning and stacking motivations.
Right.
You got to line up all possible motivators. You got to learn how to turn curiosity into passion, passion into purpose, layer in autonomy and mastery. So you have the three big intrinsic motivators. You also have to acknowledge that fear is a very big motivator and learn how to work with that positively. You have to understand that pride and money are huge motivators and solve those, right? Like that full stack. And then you have to layer in the 6 layers of grit. And if you do all that, that's what pays compound interest. And I know that sounds crazy.
No, I like
but
it.
I think that's exactly.
What are the 6 layers of grit?
So, grit is traditionally, if you go by Angela Duckworth's research and her definition, she talks about it as the intersection of passion and perseverance. And she's absolutely correct. Those things are true. But it turns out, from a training perspective, there are 6, you have to break perseverance into 6 categories, essentially, and each of them seem to train independently. So there's the standard, what we think of as perseverance, what the Navy SEALs mean by embrace the suck, or I've got a sign over my desk that says do the hard thing, right? Like, it's just kick me in the teeth, punch me in the gut, I'm still coming, doesn't matter. I'm going to get up tomorrow, I'm going to do it again, I'm going to get up tomorrow, I'm going to do it again, and I don't care. That's right. And how do you train that? You do it day after day after day after day, right? Like, that's how you train that, in a sense. That's level 1. And the next level is you have the grit to control your thoughts. Because if you can't, right? I mean, David Foster Wallace, This Is Water, is the greatest meditation on this ever. And it's free online at this point. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. But you have to learn how to do that. And that, maybe it's a mindfulness practice where you practice getting into the gap and stretching out and realizing, wait a minute, there's a space between thought and emotion. And I've got some flexibility and some adaptability in that situation. Whatever it is, you have to get some control over your thoughts. And that's a grit practice. There's no other way around it. Daily, hard, unpleasant work. You're going to suffer at it and be terrible at it for years, right? And nobody ever ultimately wins that. Maybe the Dalai Lama has won that one, but I think he's lying.
Are there any action steps on getting hold of the thoughts?
Well, like the action steps are develop a mindfulness practice. Understand that there is biologically a gap between when information comes in and you're holding it in your brain. It's called latent inhibition. The longer you can hold information in your brain without judging it, the more creative and flexible you are in what solutions. It's because when you first put something into your brain, if the sensory input automatically lines up, you go for the first option, right? And just judge it immediately and go for that first option. Real creativity goes from farther out in the neuronal chain, like extending the size of the database, the pattern recognition system searches, and that takes a little bit of time. So it's called latent inhibition. It's directly correlated with creativity, and you can extend that spot. Mindfulness training over even 2 weeks. 20 minutes a day of following your breath vipassana will start to lengthen that, right? And you'll notice there's a gap. Where it gets really interesting and where this starts to get really unusual is oftentimes you can play that same game with physical sensation. So there is a signal that says, oh, this is about to hurt, and there is a gap between the point of pain and it hurts. And you can stretch it, you can play with it, right? And it's a lot more flexible. And I've broken a lot of bones along the way and things like that. And if you really fuck yourself up, you learn it's there it's survival. You have to. This is how you get through long physical therapy and everything else. But so it's not just you can play with that gap between thought and sensation a little bit, and useful mindfulness training is a really easy way to get there.
Yeah, pains are really interesting. I want to hear what the other levels of the grit are actually. Before I start. We were at 2.
And when I was I was talking to Josh Waitzkin, who I love as I think he's one of the best minds working in kind of high performance right now. I really like how he thinks about these problems, and we were talking about it, and he said, I think you're missing it. He said, I think the most important grit is the grit to be your best when you're at your worst, and he said you have to train it independently. And he said some of that, like, Wim Hof's cold showers, right? That's training to be, if you can, like,
exactly.
right? I really adopt this. I tell this story, but public speaking really matters. Like, everything I do matters. So, like, when I'm on stage, I really care about it. And so when I write a new speech, I practice it aloud a couple of times, and I run it with a couple people in the room sometimes. I tune it, and I practice a couple more times, and then I wait for a day where I was up late the night before, didn't get a whole lot of sleep. I work an entire day. I go to the gym. I work out really, really hard. I come home, don't eat, take my dogs and hike them up a mountain and do my speech while hiking up the mountain. And if I can do my speech under those conditions, well, I can do it whenever. It doesn't
You
matter.
really intentionally do that? You swear to baby Jesus? That's amazing. That's impressive.
It's not that. Those situations arise in my day, anyways. There's always one day every couple of weeks where I didn't get enough sleep, and I'm going to work out at the end of the day. All I'm doing is putting another hour on the end of it. Yeah, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But the payoff is, and I got to tell you something. At the end, this story, the end of Stealing Fire, I got really sick. It was a hard book to write. I caught a really weird illness. I lost 20 pounds. I sort of lost control of my bowels for a little while. I had to do a speech, and I was in that condition, and every big speech, lots of people in the room, every single tech thing that could go wrong over the course of a speech, like their entire system, like bit by bit, fell apart. Slides went, sound went, slides came back, but it was somebody else's slide. Everything you could possibly imagine happened over the course of an hour, and I was like, whatever. Like, I can do this because I've done this fucking speech while hiking up a hill exhausted. Like, okay, whatever, I got this.
The question that I have sometimes as far as like having grit and being able to, grit your teeth and bear through and just keep on fighting on is, at what point is someone on the wrong path and they're still gritting their teeth through it?
So that's a very fair point, and sort of worth knowing. And I think, on a certain level, goal setting. One of the things we talked about motivators and aligning all possible motivators. One of the things I didn't talk about was goals. And there's a bunch of different levels of goal setting. And I think that's like setting proper goals and setting review sessions for your goals. Because certainly, you know, and I've had this experience, startups are phenomenal. Entrepreneurship is a great example of this, where you're like, you're all in. And then you're 8 months into the project, you've run into your 5th roadblock, you're still not raising money. And now you can actually see that, like, everything is it's not a good idea. Like, you gave it your all, but it's and the worst thing you can do is, you know, go on at that point. And now, like, the next action is, you know, sometimes the gritty thing to do is to know when to say, okay, I've had enough, right? Stop, I'm done. I'm gonna, you know, this is not best use of my time. Maybe that's a totally different grit subset.
I always have those questions with myself. I think they call it like the sunk cost fallacy. It's kind of like that thing. But I always wonder that, because there is the allegory of like the guy that's, you know, he's digging for water and he was like a foot below hitting it, and then he stops, and I'm just like, I wonder how many things I've been.
So the other so I have a rule also, though, is like, if I say I'm going to do something out loud, if I speak something into the world, I do it. Like, it's done. So I take a long time before I'm willing to give voice to something. But if you hear me say, oh wow, that's a really cool idea, I'm going to write a book about that.
Yeah.
I'm going to write a book about that, because I've spoken it. So like, and I will stick to that. Like, I'll start the book, and if I get 2/3 of it through and it's not working, okay, I'll stop. It's the wrong time to write this book, and I will wait and wait and wait and come back to it 15 years later. And, you know, I'm working on a screenplay right now that I wrote 18 years ago.
Cool. That's cool, man. What were the other layers of the grit conversation?
There's also the grit you got to be gritty enough to train your weaknesses, right? And being at your best when you're at your worst is different than training your weaknesses, the weak spots in your game. You just have to. There's no over time. You know, the great Navy SEAL saying. It's a quote from a Greek philosopher who's Jamie has written down there, and I can't remember his name, so I'm going to sound stupid here, but I'll quote the SEALs. But you don't rise when facing a challenge, we don't rise to the occasion, we sink to the level of our training. And that's like functional neurobiology, right? Like, the more norepinephrine, which is anxiety and fear, there is in the system. Remember earlier I talked about the size of the database, the pattern recognition system searches for solutions? More norepinephrine in the system, it shrinks that database. So the extreme example is fight or flight. In acute fear situations, you only have 3 options. You can flee, you can fight, or you can freeze. And freezing is actually what happens when the brain gives you both the fight and the flight signal at once. So you're only getting 2 options, but freezing is actually a short circuit when they cross wire. That's the extreme example, right? But a little bit of norepinephrine in the system, a little bit of fear in the system, that's why we revert to the level of our training, right? It's why, you know, I'm 50 years old and I can get in an argument with my wife, and it can get to a level of like emotional rawness where suddenly I'm arguing like a 14-year-old boy, right? Like, happens to everybody. Like, we all do this, right? Like, we revert to the level of our training. You revert to the last level where you felt safest and where you were like, well, my fucking kung fu works here. So that's where I'm going, because shit's in the fan, man. Damn.
God damn.
Talk about my first dog.
Are you familiar with polyvagal theory? Stephen Porges. You'll quite appreciate it as you get into it.
I am, but only by name, and like, I know his name, and I know people have been like, "How are you familiar with blah blah?" You should check it out.
Yeah, check it out. I mean, there's a lot to get into. There's another book that I'm reading right now that I've reread and re-listened many times, and I don't remember what the name of it is. It's The Healing Powers of the Vagus Nerve, I think is what it's called. Highly recommended. But a lot of it's great that you mentioned the freeze part, because a lot of people think of, like, you know, sympathetic, parasympathetic, you know, fight, flight, or you know, relax, chill. But then there's that whole other component to your nervous system.
Well, the thing that most people, and I don't know why this isn't common knowledge, because it's really clear with every system in the human body is a spectrum experience. Flow, micro flow to macro flow. Or, you know, the full spectrum is actually fight or flight to group flow, because fight or flight is the least amount of options, and group flow is everybody's performing at their best, and there's a group of them, and they can go in any direction. So it's least options to most options. But that's this sort of spectrum of human experience.
In that book, sorry, I cut you off.
No, go ahead. Please.
So in that book, you have to roll a thing anyway. But in the book that
I don't know what you're talking about, man.
you're lighting the lighter as we're going. It's not like people don't know what a lighter sounds like.
I don't know what you're talking about, man. We're in California, Colorado.
We're in Colorado. I don't know what I was saying exactly.
I know
what I was saying. No, I know what I was saying. I know what I was saying. In that book, they get into one of the things that can take us the quickest out of they call it a dorsal vagal state. So dorsal vagal state, it's like the posterior side. Dorsal means backside, the dorsal fin. When that side is innervated, when that side is active, it puts you into a little bit more of like a freeze place. Then there's the just like a little breakdown, like the poly part. Spinal, I'm okay actually. Spinal sympathetic branch, which that's like that fight flight part, which is super, super fascinating. The other day, I was riding my bike, going out in front of a grocery store. My bike I kind of like wobbled for whatever reason up on a curb, and I thought I was going to fall for a second, and I could feel my whole spine like light up with this like prickly electric. I'm like, my motherfucking spinal sympathetic branch. Like I would never think that.
Dude. Yeah, no, it's like I got to tell you. So yesterday, I'm driving up here, right, and I'm exhausted. I'm halfway through the drive. I've been up since like 3 o'clock in the morning writing, and then it's like 4 hours in, and Colorado weekend traffic, like they don't fuck around. It's like 75 miles an hour and like 15 inches between the cars, and you got and it's one lane, right? Like, and it's significant. And there were 3 different moments where I, nearly died because somebody tried to pass that kind of thing, whatever. Yeah. And each time I just started laughing because I was like, now I'm awake. This is great. Can we get another one? I'm good. Let's do that.
That's
another hour.
Yeah, it's interesting. Albert Einstein had some smart quotes saying you can only perceive what your theory allows, or something like that. That's like paraphrasing, but like you're looking at me like that doesn't make any sense.
Well, no,
maybe that doesn't make sense.
The quote you were going for, I think, is you can't solve a problem at a certain level with the same ideas at that level.
Nope, there's a different quote. No, there's a different quote. It's something based off of like you perceive what your theory permits you. It's like your theory is the filter that you perceive the world through.
Well, so the biggest version of that has got to be the Bannister effect, which I wrote about in Rise of Superman, which is named after Roger Bannister because Bannister, right, if you look at 4-minute mile times before he broke it, took him fucking forever, right, and everybody thought it was impossible, and it was like the quarter a second a decade to get there, and he breaks the mile time, and a month later somebody beats his time, and 3 months later somebody beats his time, and 5 years later it's a teenager, and the physical challenge hasn't changed. All that's changed is the mental frame. What was used to be impossible is now possible. They call it the Bannister effect, and it's just it's cognitive reframing. It's cognitive behavioral therapy applied to impossible challenges.
There's another potential, like this is like way out there type perspective, but are you familiar with Rupert Sheldrake and morphic resonance and all that stuff? You are savvy with that stuff.
Shut up.
All right, good.
We're not doing this.
I know.
No.
I'm not even going to say
No.
it. So just people can look into it. But oftentimes discoveries, they end up being discovered around the same time, like almost like the same day.
Stephen Johnson wrote about that really well in Where Good Ideas Come From. Great book, great writer. And he talks about the clustering of great ideas. And certainly it seems to be true.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Things
interesting.
bubble up in the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
Right. Which is, a lot of people, a lot of different philosophers who said this, Nietzsche included, and Freud also, is that's sort of what they mean by you can't get past your culture. Like the way it builds your culture is a cognitive frame around your ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not to keep on referencing random dead people, but that's like Joseph Campbell in The Ordinary World.
Joseph Campbell too.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's like starting off no matter what world you come from, that's your whole world. That's the ordinary world. And then from there, it's, I think, like mandatory for every person to go travel and have different experiences, just so you can realize that the world you come from is strange. Like what you think is normal is strange to someone else out there somewhere. So the thing that I wanted to say about the damn poly stuff, polyvagal theory stuff. So the ventral system, the front side of that branch of the vagal system, when that's active, that's more like they call it social engagement. So when you're in a socially engaged place, and like right now, like we're hanging out, we're chilling, shooting the shit, like making jokes, like that's like, okay, our nervous system, you can actually study that and see that. It's like, oh cool, it's content, it feels healthy. The fastest way to take someone out of one of those fight, flight, or dorsal states is through social engagement. So you can kind of like jump the switch.
I'll give you a really weird example of exactly what you're talking about. I run a dog sanctuary, and I have a lot of dogs in the house. So humans co-evolved with dogs, and one of the first things we did, and the reason we co-evolved with them, they came in and they ate our garbage, right? And cleaner camps led to healthier humans. So friendlier wolves were sort of brought into the camps, and they became our alarm systems. They hear better and they smell better. So we outsource safety and security. Now, most people have no idea they do this. But if you sleep with a large pack of dogs, with more than like 3 or 4 or 5 dogs, something that actually triggers that evolutionary pattern, you will offload your safety and security functions. They will drop down a level. You have no idea you're feeling a stress at every moment of time. That's just your basic level of alertness. It's there even when you're asleep, right? It stays on.
Yeah.
But it actually can turn off if you sleep with big packs of dogs. When I travel, second night I'm in a hotel, it comes back on. So I never sleep the second night I'm in a hotel.
Huh.
Won't happen.
Yeah, I've heard that the first night in any hotel or any new sleeping environment in general, there's like some evolutionary switch that goes off where you're like, you don't subconsciously don't completely trust that environment. I never heard that with the dogs. That's interesting. You
Really
outsource that part.
Yeah, you outsource this. So you can feel like what I'm saying is the same social reaction you're talking about. There's a really kind of deep level of it that is constantly probably producing low-level cortisol, low-level stress hormones, norepinephrine, just to keep you awake enough so that that information has salience and is paid attention to.
Well, that's where it gets interesting is when you have maybe that low-level cortisol drip or whatever the cocktail is from some random traumatic thing or some maybe built into the zeitgeist fear that you carry throughout the day that kind of keeps you in maybe this spinal sympathetic or maybe in a freeze place. So figuring out I wonder how many people, or myself included, if we're just using this like the polyvagal theory thing, like, do I even know what being in a ventral vagal state is?
So in 2015, we thought we had a pretty good understanding of flow and cortisol. Yeah. Right? Like if there was ever a state where that was turned off, right? As you move into flow, even in Rise of Superman, Herb Benson's work, as you move into flow, all those stress hormones get flushed out of your system, right? And there was good physiological research that showed the exact that thing. It made sense. Everybody thought it was true. And then this German team got involved, God damn them, and have been running all kinds.
Ruined my whole theory.
All kinds. Well, it wasn't my theory, but it was a lot of people's theories. But we have been running cortisol tests on flow for the past 3 years, and now we don't know what the fuck we know. It's all over the place. Like everything we thought we knew that fit our neat little story of how stress hormones work in the body, it's gone. Yeah. We are now back to square one, saying, okay, we don't get it.
Isn't that funny how you naturally, likely, unless you're like a better man than a lot, will protect your theory, even if you know it could be wrong. Like if you've seen like Religulous, the document, and you see, what's the guy's name? He's brilliant. I quite appreciate him.
The director or the host?
The host. Yeah. Come on.
Nope.
He's great. Anyways, Religulous. But in that, so he's talking to people like in the deep South, like super, super religious, like they got the shotgun like on the ready to kind of chase him out. And they get really defensive from him just asking questions. Like he's not saying anything's wrong or right. He's just asking questions. And it's just an interesting thing when you guard your beliefs so much that it ends up being kind of like a vulnerable place when there's a hint at something that's maybe potentially kind of rocking it a little bit. It's just an interesting thing.
I think that's true across the board. I think that's one of the, and it's, science is really hard that way. Because everybody, gets their ideas just turned over and turned over and turned. Like that's why we call it science, right? It's just, we think things are true for a long time, and maybe they still stay true at that particular scale, and then there's a different scale to contend with, and it's evolving, and it's a living thing, and it's a blood sport also. It's mean and competitive, but what I love about it, and what strikes me as so brave about it, is you see these people who have spent their whole life developing one idea, and then suddenly they're like, you know what, I was wrong. the data doesn't line up, I was wrong. Ludwig Wittgenstein is one of the only people I know of as a non-philosopher or non-scientist who did it, who wrote the Tractatus, this super famous book, and then spends the rest of his life saying, no, I was wrong. Like, check it out. This is philosophical investigations.
You can almost trust the person more if they've been wrong and come up and stood up to it. Like, yeah.
It's why I never quite understood during a couple election cycles ago where, like, the fact that John Kerry changed his mind was a bad thing.
Right,
like,
yeah.
That's insane.
Right.
That's called thinking, learning, like life. Like, if you don't change your mind, well, that's prejudice and ignorance and bigotry. Like, whoa,
right.
Hold up, stereotypes. Like, we've got problems.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
he's a flip-flopper.
Seriously, thank you. Thank you so much. It's like fuck you is an insult. Well, no, fuck you too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Has there been any big things that you flip-flopped on in your life? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
And the answer is absolutely. I mean, so one, I started out, when I was first interested in this consciousness stuff. I mean, I moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1986, dropped out of college because the New Age was booming, right? I did monasteries and ashram, you know what I mean? Like, I went that full route for a while and didn't find what I was looking for at all, which was any kind of mystical experience would have been great. I got nothing, zero, after, did all the psychedelics, did all the ashram monastery stuff, and was like, okay, I just spent a long time down this rabbit hole. It turns out it's empty as far as I can tell. And came out and, essentially became a hardcore science writer, right? That was one of the things that moved me in that direction towards science. So, I mean, even at a fundamental level, I think I got turned around on that. I also think I got turned around on a lot of family stuff. Like, I think I held my mother and father responsible for a whole bunch of stuff for a lot of years that, like, now in hindsight, I'm like, holy crap. They had me when they were in their early 20s. They were
kids.
Dirt poor.
Yeah.
And holy shit, they had no idea what they were doing, and they had no money. And, like, that was like what I was just dealing with, like 20-year-olds trying to make really hard decisions in the world and, holding them, responsible as if they were responsible. So, I got turned around on a lot of family stuff also, I think.
Yeah.
Wanted to thank you guys for supporting this podcast via grabbing yourselves an Align band. Align band is a heavy-duty resistance band. It comes along with a door anchor and a traveling case, and you can attach that band to any hotel door, any car door, any door around your house, and then you got a resistance band hanging off of your wall, just like you would at any kind of CrossFit gym or any kind of gym. You can decompress your joints. You can use it for exercise. You can use it as a yoga strap. It is a true minimalist tool that I definitely carry with me anywhere I go. We got that for you guys at aligntherapy.com/gear. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas, you can hit me up directly at Align Band on Instagram. And if your question relates to other folks, I will just post up a video specifically catered to that question. There's also an online program that goes along with it, and truly is the one tool that I bring with me everywhere I go. So we got it for y'all. aligntherapy.com/gear. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
What's next in the project list? What should we be looking forward to?
Well, the novel I'm really excited about. It's called Last Tango in Cyberspace, and
Cool.
It's like a near-term future thriller about the evolution and importance of empathy, and goes from consciousness and the question that I think is very relevant in these AI times of what do we mean? What is life? How do we define life? And how do we define consciousness and conscious life? And what does that mean once we decide something is conscious, in terms of the responsibilities that come with it? And it was, it's just super fun. I wrote a book that I would want to find, like when I'm running through an airport and I've been traveling for 3 days, and what I want is something that's really fun and engaging, and it's going to make me laugh and really grip me. And also when I'm done is going to blow my mind and take me to places that I actually didn't end up think I was going to go. That's what I wanted. That's always what I want to read. So that's what I tried to write, and I think I've been successful.
So you're doing multiple books at the same time?
That was this year. So every year, we talked earlier about different levels of grit, training weaknesses, and all that stuff, and goal setting. And so I try to set different kinds of writing challenges every year. And sometimes, like when I wrote Bold, one of the reasons I wrote Bold is because every business book I'd ever read sucked. They were just so boring. They were terrible. And I was like, okay, so the business challenge, writing challenge was Bold, was can I write a business book that doesn't suck, that's fun and engaging and illuminating. And was I successful or not is somebody else can decide, but that was my challenge. So I also sometimes when I was writing Bold, I was also writing Tomorrowland. I was trying to write 2 books at once to see if I could do it.
Wow.
So now I'm trying to write 3 at once.
Damn.
Which is massively difficult.
I'm having existential breakdowns about like embarking in one. Let me show you, son.
Not for the faint of heart. And let's just say that my wife she's a very lovely woman who has somehow can forgive the fact that I've been like, honey, I'll see you in 2 years.
Right. Do you have does it become more and more, so at this point you're a successful author, like you could say that, or I'll say that, or whatever. Is there a point where it's like, it becomes more pressure with success because now you have to outdo yourself, or you're like, it's okay if this book bombs?
Oh, so that's an interesting question. So it's interesting. I always say when I teach writing, I always remind people that and this is it comes out harsh, but you're in the arts, in actually pretty much anywhere, you're always somebody's bitch. And so as you come up in writing, right? You're working for your editors in the beginning. In the beginning, you maybe are probably working at a low enough level that you have a little more freedom, but you're still working for your editors, working for a magazine or a newspaper or right. When you sell your books, you have a publisher, right. And even if you get to any level of success, suddenly you have an audience, and they've been loyal to you and they've helped you get where you go, and it's making a living out of words is so crazy hard. Just so many people try, and it takes so much luck and so much work, I think. And that you share, anybody who's going to give me 7 hours and read one of my books, that's a big ask. Thank you, right? And so you feel so you're like, oh my God, I'm my audience's bitch. So the pressure to outdo the previous book, you have to lose that early on. I'm on Last Tango is my 9th book. And I've got 2 more in drawers. So there's 11. I've written 11 books total. You have to when I was writing, so West to Jesus was a book that I was very proud of. And when I finished it, I was like, wow, that's the best thing I've ever written. And I couldn't start my next book. It took me 9 months of daily facing blank pages. No writer couldn't get anywhere because of the shadow of that book. And so I learned, you have to. So I have a rule, which is you always start your next project a week before your last project finishes. So the novel, the week before Stealing Fire came out, I started the novel. I always want to be thinking about what's the next creative project, and I always want it moving before the last one tails off, so that I don't have, so that that pressure that you're talking about to beat yourself isn't there.
Wow, I never heard that. I like it. How do people find more of your stuff? How do people learn more? We're wrapping this thing up.
StephenKotler.com.
Bam.
That's
easy enough.
Stephen
What about
Kotler
social and all that stuff? Which ones are you like?
Stephen_Kotler on Twitter is good.
Cool.
I'm there. I'm all over Facebook. In 11 different manifestations.
Perfect.
You can find me through my books or through the Flow Genome Project or
Perfect.
Whatever. All this stuff is embarrassing to say out loud.
I'll include in. I'll chop this part out, including the intro.
I'm just fuck, man. Find me on social.
Well, whatever. People are interested. People got questions. They want to hear more about the thing. All right. Well, sweet, man. Thanks for doing this.
Hey,
thanks for hanging
pleasure.
out. Thanks for attending my little band workshop. That was a real honor.
This was good. I absolutely exhausted at Flow Camp after a full day of running Riot and your weird band shit.
Weird shit.
I'm sore in places I didn't even know I had.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, you were getting overzealous. Not over. You were getting perfect amount of zealous, but you're doing shit that I never. Well, most of the stuff honestly I had done, but it's I'm yeah, goddamn, get it, Kotler.
Oh yeah, I wanted to get.
You're taking it.
I was hips and ankle and what else can we do? And, well, the other thing is
you're like a therapist.
We're banding back my shoulder. I got a 10-inch steel plate in there,
right?
From that's a year old, so nothing's in its right proper place yet.
Yeah.
So that was phenomenal therapy.
Cool. All right, sweet man. Over and out.
Peace out.
Wrapping it up. We're out in the mountains. I'm going to go run with a moose. Peace.
Align Podcast.
Thank you guys so much for tuning into that conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. There's some ways that you can support this podcast, one of which you can pick up an Align band, which is a heavy-duty resistance band. Comes along with a door anchor and a carrying case and a video guide on how to mobilize those joints and integrate that body of yours. Really great stuff. You can be found at aligntherapy.com and also on amazon.com. Thank you also so much for utilizing the Amazon affiliate link on the right-hand sidebar of the podcast page. Bookmark that thing. Anytime you purchase some crap on Amazon, purchase that crap. Through that link, we get a percentage of it. Costs you nothing. And I think that's enough. Thank you guys so much for reviews on iTunes. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Pow.